I just thought for fun, I would add someone who would be very, very interested in today's presentation. So, through Archimbaldo's work, this arresting work, the basic shape of a fish, unlike what is shown here, is very simple. It can be drawn with a single sweep of a pencil. And that elegant design, that arc, is a reflection of how superbly adapted fish are to the cool, curving world of water. And interestingly enough, Archimbaldo's oil painting is most appropriately labeled water, though you don't see a drop of water on it. And water is the natural environment for fish. So vertebrates have backbones. Fish are vertebrates that live in water and is not a whale or a dolphin or a seal. Isn't that an odd definition of seeking what is a fish? So even if I'm in the water and I have a vertebrate, I am not a fish, technically. So fish breathe using special organs called gills. And so water and a vertebrate are definable characteristics of a fish, but not the only ones. Our environment is air. We need air to breathe. We walk across the land, terra firma, because we can move side to side, we can go up and down, we actually clamber up the hills and mountains. But what we cannot do by ourselves is fly in our environment. We cannot fly in the air that surrounds us. With that in mind, the air the environment that surrounds a fish is water. A fish can not only swim forward and back, side to side. As we all know, fish do float up and down. They can swim up and swim down. So the analogy with us, unlike us, we cannot float up into the sky. We can't swim into the air. In their environment, fish can effectively fly through the environment it lives in. Isn't that remarkable? Because that's what it's doing. It flies in the environment it inhabits. And I'm told by scuba divers that when they float up, it does feel like they're flying underground because water is nearly 800 times more dense than air. It is easy for fish to live suspended effortlessly in water. It's mainly due to their swim bladders, which we will discuss later, but I thought that was so astounding. I was really astounded when I was doing research for today. So the mass spawning runs of fish, this internal urge that cause a fish to enter potentially treacherous ocean, often migrating thousands of miles, blindly focused on reproduction. It is amazing to see, to observe the near perfect synchronicity. And if you watch them closely, it's the mere flick, swishing of a tail, microsecond timing. And you really can pay tour groups to swim inside this vortex. Can you believe that? To be inside this school of fish, this vortex of fish, surrounded by silver torpedoes, glistening just brilliantly. Can you imagine that? Just think of the energy that will be surrounding you while you float. And most likely, I would be floating terrified in this swarm of movements. I would probably be silenced because my own heartbeat would just deafen everything around me. I think that would be breathtaking. That's something I would love to try, to be engulfed by beauty like this. Ephemeral beauty, because if you try to touch it, they will just vanish in a heartbeat. It's important to approach beauty with humility. And that sense of wonder is what we're aiming for, not only in life, but in today's presentation, because life is a wonder. A very warm welcome to everyone. Thank you for sharing your afternoon with us for our 74th presentation. The Nourishment Projects is about joyous curiosity and being part of something much larger than ourselves. And here are some of the references that inform this presentation. And it is valuable to get a bird's eye view on everything. There was an eclipse last week, viewed from above, from space. This lovely home of ours, this blue marble, or I would actually like to call it more a blue marvel because it is such a marvel, is majority water. It's 70% water. Okay, why then do we call this planet Earth? It's not mainly Earth. Shouldn't it be more planet liquid or perhaps planet water? I find it deeply disheartening that everything always focuses around us, centers around us, the human. Why? Don't laugh. This presentation, while not being about bait and switch, it is geared to decenter the individual. So I want to point like this is a jewelry advertisement from India. I don't think anyone even noticed this diamond clasp. In this presentation, we are using fish as bait to talk about what this picture is talking about, man or human. Both are, the figure of man is hard to miss here, and it's also going to be very hard to miss the looming figure of man in today's presentation. And it's important to notice that this hierarchy isn't correct because it's just reflecting our entitled views. This is not how nature created us. So what is this presentation not going to be about? For starters, it is not going to be about fishing, though admittedly, fishing is extremely relaxing and a marvelous way to connect with nature herself. Fishing cultivates patience and keen senses. You know, a pleasing environment, be it a rushing stream, a pond, or even a tide pool, or especially ocean for sure, but a quiet bay. Such environments always help us connect to an open mind. I always find that to be true. And to each other, because in the quiet, our minds open up, I feel. There are myriad ways to tie a fishing hook. Books galore have been written on this subject. That is not going to be a part of today's presentation. There are also different ways of fishing. This is a unique fishing method in Sri Lanka. This method of fishing early in the morning with these huge nets, triangular looking, is from Assam in India. And this is a very recognizable fishing method in Myanmar, which was formerly known as Burma. On Myanmar's Inle Lake, people practice this unique style of fishing where they gently lower thimble-shaped nets in a very shallow lake over fish that are hiding in the water grasses. The fishermen, as you can see, then wrap their oar against the net. They're just doing this for the photograph because the nets would be under the water. And when they wrap their oars, the frightened fish rush into the net, and that's how they catch the fish. So when the fish gets disturbed, they just rush into the net and you just pick them up. Similar methods, different baskets. These traditional methods also help catch fish in Africa. But in Africa, why I'm including this is they have a diversity of basket. I'm only showing two here. Each basket, both the one on the left and the one on the right, each basket is associated with a certain fish. And so the one on the right is from the area in Sudan. And I'm very grateful to Dr. Foreman Bandama from the Field Museum for sharing his knowledge about this and many, many other details. Again, the art of fishing is not the focus for today's presentation. But I want to make sure I point out, fishing impacts on Africa are surprising and disturbing. Somali pirates were in the news a few years ago for capturing freight ships. Initially, though, these pirates were desperate fishermen who were getting less catch due to global overfishing by massive trawlers. To feed their families, the poor Somali fishermen had turned to piracy. It became lucrative, and then that piracy was taken over by the Italian mafia. So what really happens when you have massive trawlers coming and scooping up fish? They scoop everything up, even endangered fish. And that is called, rather dismissively, bycatch, dismissed as collateral damage that it happens. No. But look further. When it's said, for example, and this is happening throughout coasts of Africa and other third world countries, When a Senegalese fisherman, as depicted here, goes out to fish in the rather dangerous waters and surrenders all his catch to companies to make sure it is in Europe the next morning, this Senegalese will then go to a home with meals that are primarily devoid of protein. So imagine children growing up with less protein. It affects their growth. And that is true throughout the world, the third world for sure, which is now, if you just look at these, look at the differences. Global South is what it's euphemistically called. I just still think it's a massive pejorative. And this overfishing is happening to feed the demand for sushi or oftentimes exclusive Michelin star meals because they want to catch those rare fishes, bycatch galore. And what do the people in Africa get to buy? Leftover bones after the fillets have been taken. Northern consumers benefit from the immensely long, untamed, and vulnerable shorelines of sub-Saharan Africa. This has been going on for decades. European, Russian, Japanese, and Korean boats. Now, these boats are both legal and piratical, have raked Africa's rich continental shelves for decades. And now, China, a very powerful new player in the world's fish race, has steamed into the African battlefield. The Belt and Road initiatives are not just Belt and Road. The Belt is implying the waterways as well. So Africa has steamed into the African battlefield in terms of water and also in the Pacific. So 4 South American countries have joined forces in a bid to combat illegal fishing by huge Chinese fleets off their coasts. This is also happening in other parts of the world, not just South American coasts. So Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru have threatened measures to prevent, discourage, and jointly confront, read between the lines, this is all military force, to confront the illegal fishing that is going on near the exclusive economic zones in the Pacific Ocean, because fish mint money. Economics regulates all of this. Brexit, just look at the numbers. The tons of fish that are caught off. This is one of the big contentions was, and I still may perhaps still is, bone of contention for Brexit, fishing. These relevant issues, and they are very relevant, but are not part of today's presentation because we only have a certain time to talk about this. And I didn't want to have overkill because the stuff that I want to focus on are very important. I want to give it time. Speaking of people who love to fish simply for the sheer pleasure, for that meditative state it engenders, opera lovers will know Kirite Kanawa. She's very well known for singing Countess Almaviva in The Marriage of Figaro. What you may not know, that one of her favorite pastimes for this New Zealander is fishing. I think she has a home up in Surrey in England, so she goes salmon fishing. This presentation is not about recipes, though I'm really intrigued to try a fish omelet. I had not even thought of it till I saw this. I'm like, oh, intriguing. And yeah, I would like to try this simply because I've never heard of seaweed batter. And I'm picking cod because, fish and chips, because that's effectively one of the most common dishes throughout the world. Codfish tastes great. And not only for Lisa and William, for all our friends celebrating Passover on Monday, Mazel Tov, enjoy gefilte fish. I think I just found out it's made out of carp. And apparently, for those who joined late, originally the women previously used to save the fish in the bathtub so they could have it fresh. Good to know. Things I learn. Mazel tov again. Our culture is pooled with fish references. Many movies have them. I enjoyed salmon fishing in the Yemen and I really laughed. This is a very funny movie. It's probably a classic by now, Fish Called Wanda. Along with movies, we have books teeming with names of fish. I love this title. I enjoyed the book too. It was okay. Not too bad though. Clever title, isn't it? Saving Fish from Drowning. And you may be able to recognize the fisherman that we talked about in Inle Lake by Myanmar. From movies and books to artwork across cultures, be it Chinese, Japanese, Indian, totem poles, Vikings, pretty much all artwork across the world, you can be found with references to fish. Fish are potent symbols. And this one, although you cannot see the fish, we will get to the fish in a second. This one is representative for global art, and it might interest you for the subtlety of what it's trying to say. The subject is the persona in the green robe. His name is, he's an actual figure, Tanuma Okitsugu. He was a counselor in Japan's Edo period. So Edo period is where the time you have lots of ukiyo-e paintings, there's global trade going on with America and all of that. Here he is surveying his land. On the bottom left, because this is a scroll, I just took a snapshot of it. The pine tree is there to impress the idea of longevity, both his and his rule. So associated with Tanuma's lore is a home built partially underground. So when a visitor looked up to the roof, it's a glass roof, they saw fish swimming overhead. So it would be that the home is underwater. Why is that? So effectively, his home is under an aquarium to imply that not Mr. Tanuma Okitsugu is a dragon, because the dragon's lair is underwater. Dragons live underwater, and they are considered extremely powerful and very lucky in the Far East. So effectively, what a brilliant way to silently communicate power. I just laugh because without intelligence, real luxury is absolutely inaccessible. Can you imagine dreaming that up? I will make my house underneath an aquarium, so whoever comes, I am the dragon. Because it goes without saying, such a construction of a saltwater aquarium would be prohibitively expensive. It's one thing to have a freshwater aquarium, as this child is gaping at. It's still a huge feat. But to have a saltwater aquarium in the realms of bank balance is an entirely different thing. Regardless of whether it's saltwater or freshwater, aquariums are fun. Fish found in tide pools, nature's aquariums, have delighted children and people curious for ages. The fish found in the tide pools are very different from fish found in coral reefs, such as Bora Bora shown here. The fish that would interest this penguin will be very different from the other two. Why? Because the penguin's habitat is different, the water is different, and the water matters, especially the depth of the water. The world ocean covers more than 70% of this planet, and it covers 2/3 of this planet's surface. Did you see how I didn't call it planet Earth? The ocean is broken into 5 main layers or zones based on their depth from the surface. So a quick synopsis. The 5 different basins comprising the world ocean, first of all, is Pacific, Atlantic, Indian, Southern, and the Arctic. So now if you look at that, that's going across the board laterally. Vertically, each layer also has a different temperature, the amount of light that goes in there, and the living creatures that inhabit them. So there's a diversity going all the way down. So now we're going to go forward. So there'll be diversity in the lives found in each of the zones. So in the first zone, the epipelagic zone, due to the light and warmth, this layer is full of life. So it's going about 660 feet down. Seaweeds, coral reefs, marine life such as dolphins, blue whales, sea turtles, and jellyfish are all found here. The sunlight allows seaweeds, such as algae, to perform photosynthesis, creating nearly 50% of the atmospheric oxygen that we benefit from. The next layer below, which goes down quite a bit, the mesopelagic zone, which is also known as the twilight zone, is home to a great diversity of some of the strangest animals you will find. They also include things that we are familiar with, such as octopus, crab, krill, wolf eel, and cat shark. And despite bursting with aquatic life, this layer has remained relatively untouched from commercial fishing. No plants grow within this layer. So creatures either feed by filtering the water or hunting other creatures. People can dive to this layer, but need to wear very, very heavily protective suits due to the high pressure and freezing cold. There's absolute lack of heat. Many animals in their early life stages take part in a nightly mass vertical migration from this twilight zone towards the surface. So if you look at the one to the right, it looks like a feather duster, but it's a copepod. It sports appendages like these things right down here that detect ripples from predators. Because if you're going deep, dark enough, if you're living in the dark, you'll be blind or you'll see very little because there's no purpose to it. Nature is very, very an efficient designer. So these feather-like structures help the tiny crustacean, it is a fish, to save energy by slowing the rate at which it sinks. We mentioned wolf eels. The wolf eel shown here, the reason I'm including it, yeah, we may not think it's a pretty thing, but look at the larger beauty. They mate for life. The reason I'm including this, lifelong partnerships. When I hear, fish don't feel pain, fish don't feel things, how do you know? How do we know that they don't feel love and emotions? They're mating for life. Why would they do that otherwise? Anyway, the dragonfish is signaling now the bathypelagic zone, which makes up nearly 90% of the ocean. So you're dropping down below the surface 13,000 feet. It is also called the midnight zone because of the complete absence of light. So that means it's constant darkness. The only light found in this layer is obtained from the animals, and by animal I mean fish, bioluminescence, which they utilize in search for food. The main defense at this deep sea level is really to mimic endless water, to suck up every ounce of any searchlight that might fall on you. So you want to absorb all the light that may come from a predator fish like this anglerfish. So for defense, it's not enough to have tons of black pigment on you, because the key is the skin surface for this fish. If the skin surface of the fish is smooth and simple, beautiful looking, the light will bounce off it into the eyes of the predator, so you'll be easily spotted. So the more complex the surface structure, the more likely the photons of light will get trapped inside the unevenness of the skin, the more safe is the fish. Doesn't nature fascinate what it does to protect? It's done it through evolution. We will be returning to this anglerfish soon for an entirely different reason. The abyssopelagic, you're not missing a screen because this is how pitch dark it is down there. It is the pitch black bottom layer of the ocean because no sunlight reaches it. 3/4 of the deep ocean floor lies in this zone. The water temperature is near freezing, and only a small number of creatures are found at such depths. Don't you marvel at the creatures that can survive here? This is important to remember. Creatures that are very small, that are probably almost blind by our standards, but they have other senses. They survive in places we couldn't. The organisms found here are transparent often, and like I said, blind invertebrates. They include sea stars, shrimps, and squids. And this is followed again by the hadopelagic zone, like named after Hades. And these are the areas that include what you've heard of, the Mariana Trenches. Just imagine what it takes to survive here. Also imagine the biological implications. There is no light there. So again, most creatures will be blind. It also implies that they won't have what we call the circadian rhythm. They will not have an internal clock because they're not waking up to the morning light. All these biological changes are there. The Mariana Trench is so deep that even Mount Everest could be wholly submerged if you place it in its bottom. The temperature in the Mariana Trenches in this Hadal zone is marginally above freezing. And again, no natural light ever reaches the zone. However, the humans are represented here. Unfortunately, we are there through plastic. Can you believe that? Debris, plastic debris found at the depth of 36,000 feet. Microplastics have been found inside organisms living in the Hadal Zone. Look at our footprint. The Mariana Trench has higher levels of overall pollution in certain regions than some of the most polluted rivers in China. I think you have a sense of why and how I've curated today's presentation. It's really disheartening what goes on. This is a scene from the current exhibition at Chicago's Museum of Science and Industry. It's called the Blue Paradox. It is a revolving exhibition, so it goes around the world. So it'll probably end up somewhere near where you are. And if it does, please go and experience it. It's visually stunning. But even more importantly, the message is critical. We really need to know what we are doing to our kinship. Look at this. This school of fish, when they rush by, what a sight to see. And I want to point this out because, yes, museums, when they do stuff like this, they do entertain, but they're much more important than that. They are, as I would like you to consider them, are a great reference library for humanity. So the term vouchers refer to the preserved specimens that you find in these jars. And normally these jars are in the basement because if you have thousands of jars with water in them and stuff in them, they're extremely heavy. The only place you can put them is in the basement, in storage. And through analysis, by studying the chemical compositions of these vouchers, look at them. We learn about the effects of pollution, just look at this, of climate change, because you can get the data that it was, because it's holding data, it's metadata. You can measure this fish where it was, because it's all labeled, what it was maybe 30 years ago when it was collected, and what is the chemical composition, what is the data telling you about it now. So you can study population migration, you can study about changes in geography, you can just study about everything, and especially you can study continuing evolution, because evolution is continuing. And this latter is a very important part of how I helped curate today's presentation, because this is an incomplete picture. Evolution is continuing, and this is wrong. Because not apes, chimps, or Neanderthals. Before all of this, we were fish. This is not a joke. I'm going to point now, these fins eventually evolved into hips. Really take that in. Can you believe this? From water to walking upright. Look at what life is. To me, life stuns. Vertebrates, both of this, all of this eventually becomes this, and everything in between. Because in a quick, or I think it's quick, imagine life evolved from a single cell and evolved into the multicellular. Forget that even more profound, why did that single cell come into being? I'm not going to touch that. I'm not even going to touch. Why did you bother to multiply? Why didn't you just stay this way? Why did you decide to multiply? For whatever its reason, it grew, kept on growing over millions of years. Organisms formed, and all this is happening initially in the water. Fishes came into being. Now it becomes even more fascinating. One type of fish decided to step out of the water into land. And that vertebrate split into different forms. Look at this. Look at what's happening. Conversely, over millions of years, many species disappeared, others survived. Evolution and extinction is ongoing. It is going on. We are decimating many species. Species that survived evolution cannot survive us. and we ourselves are evolving. All of us, this is our kin. We are in a continuous state of evolution from that one single cell. Our ancestors were fish. There is variety within fish because you have vertebrates in water, but there are different kinds of fish. So there's variety in there. And there is variety in the fish descendants. The first one, 450 million years ago, that stepped from the water onto the land, it split into two. We became in the forms of tetrapods, and there are other versions of the fish that kept on going. So this is the more correct version of seeing the bigger picture, not this self-serving solipsistic view that we are on the top of the chain. Completely not true. Instead of this is the more relevant tree of life. Each branch equally important in this larger family tree, because we all came from that single cell, and pretty much everything on this land itself is coming from a fish. And this is going to be a CGI, but just imagine, if you look back now, this little blue creature that somehow or the other decided to go out of the water onto the land. Suppose that creature didn't have the curiosity to leave its comfort zone, to step out of the water and into or onto uncharted land. And what if something frightened it? It didn't have the courage to stick around and went back in the water. Guess what? None of us would be here. If it didn't do that, not a single one of us would be on this land right now. Truly soak that in. Courage. And so when I read in Darwin's this sentence, man still bears in his bodily form the indelible stamp of his lowly origin. I don't think the origin of our species is particularly lowly. In fact, anything but. I mean, simply just take the physical aspect of it. And these are things you can see. This northern snakehead fish can live outside the water for 4 days. That means it's breathing air before it needs to go back in the water. Do you think Charles Darwin could survive underwater in his natural state without scuba gear for 4 minutes? I promise you he'd die. We barely adapt and hardly cooperate. Who's a lowlier creature? Because look again. Look at this goby fish. There are many varieties, but I'm using this to show the symbiotic relationship that other species have. So a shrimp goby lives in a burrow that a shrimp makes. So the goby is called a goby, but the goby that has a relationship with the shrimp, a symbiotic relationship with the shrimp, is called a shrimp goby. So in this level, shrimps are blind. And while the shrimp is creating a burrow, it continuously uses the antenna to feel a goby. And so the goby acts as a watchdog. This is all happening underwater. And the goby is continuously gently moving to reassure the shrimp, no, sweetie, all is safe. Keep on building our home. The moment the goby senses a predator, senses danger, it sharply whacks its tail, and both the shrimp and the goby hides. So here's the shrimp and there's the little goby. They live together in harmony. And look at us. We can't even get along politically. Republicans and Democrats come to loggerheads over a dinner table. Darwin calls us that we have lowly origins. Reread what you write. We're the lowly creatures. And I'm just getting started. So let's move to the next one. This anglerfish, and this is coming from the bathypelagic zone, and they have over 168 different species of anglerfish. And at that level, at that depth, creatures aren't really that big, but they are very mighty. So the anglerfish have a light that dangles above because it's near pitch dark in there, right? And some of them, like this one or this one, have a vicious underbite. But we're not here to, this is not a beauty contest. Although spiritually, this is amazing. So the anglerfish female is larger than the male. The females typically run about 2.5 feet long, and free swimming males less than half an inch. Look at the difference in the size of the fishes, the male and the female. Now meet what you call a live-in boyfriend. If and when the courtship of an anglerfish is successful, take a look. The male fuses permanently to the female. So what happens is the male gnaws into her side, thus dissolving his lips into her flesh, fuses into one, feeds off her nutrients, gets absorbed into her body, and supplies her with sperm when she needs it. You know that sentence in the Hallmark cards that says, I love you, we are one? This is the most perverted version of this. This is the most parasitic relationship I can think of. So they would be, by our definition, unmarried and living together as one. You have no clue what is available in the world of fish, because buckle up, we have much more fun coming about. Like, look at this one. The kobudai fish, you find them in Japan and in other waters. So the female kobudai changes into the male. Females are the smaller one initially. After many months, once the female transforms into the male, it emerges larger. And then what it does, because it's coming back now out, bearing testes, and it has a huge bulbous head. So what used to look like this becomes this. And it also becomes what was a female as a male becomes aggressive in nature. And now the even larger than the existing dominant male that female fish had originally mated with when it was a female. Once it becomes male, that new male will defeat the aged alpha in a violent battle for dominance. Can you believe that? And they're not the only fish that does this. Have fun with this one. You know that film Finding Nemo? In that film, Nemo's father was Marlin, and he was a male amino fish who had lost his mate and struggled alone to raise the son. His son was Nemo, made millions and millions of dollars. Great. That's the Disney version. In real life, the real Nemo's father, he would have likely switched sex following his mate's death and then paired up with a male. He would have just simply become a female and hooked up with a man. That's what that fish would do. It wouldn't care about transgender and social norms. It would just do what it's biologically prone to do. This is how nature operates. So goby fish, that previous fish we talked about, they switch sex as many other fish do. Because here's the amazing thing. Oh, I was gobsmacked. Biologically, female is the ground state. Gonads come from same tissues. So from the point of view of biology, I'm going to be polite now, male appendages are simply, according to biology, an extra birth defect. I didn't use that word. That's what was written. I don't think they're defects, but that's exactly how biology views it. So female gonads turning into male gonads is what happens in creation. And what is true for fish is true for all of fish descendants. I'll politely say, in this world, misogynists should really study biology. That said, this sex switching power is common in Vrasse, which you see right here. The male ones are blue. But the reason I'm including this, not to belabor a point, is that this stuff happens very quickly. Their ovaries disintegrate and testes grows in the place in just 10 days. And they tested all this out. To track the sex transformation, researchers removed a male from his harem and then observed the physical and genetic changes of the dominant female fish. Within minutes, and I'm saying minutes, of when the male was removed, the dominant female started exhibiting behavioral changes, becoming more aggressive, defending her territory, and getting, I don't even know how fish get flirty, but apparently it gets flirty with other females in the harem. And as the process continues, the gonads of these females, the ovaries and the testes, were completely genetically rewired, whereas few genetic changes were seen in the brain. So this is just a physical change. The ability to change sex is not limited to fish. Nature is something to study. So there's an Australian lizard, the bearded dragon. They change sex while still in embryo as a reaction to elevated temperatures. So now understand the larger implication of rising temperatures in this world. Climate change, though mainly a product of human behavior, has devastating effects on all sea creatures. How we live, consume, what we consume, how we acquire affects them tremendously. Take, for example, because this is what's happening. As temperatures change and get higher, they go back and forth. This is what's happening to them, to many fish. This is just one example. So this is the Shasta Dam in California. Many of us are now, luckily, because we are becoming more knowledgeable and more informed, we may be aware that the Native Americans who were forced off their land when this dam was built, and a lot of their ancestral burial grounds were flooded by this reservoir. What's also important to put together to this is that the dams also decimate fish populations by affecting their annual migration. Married to this, the drought that just took place and has been taking place. The California drought has a terrible toll on the Chinook salmon runs. And it's not just that a drought means that there's not enough water. The reality is there's not enough cold water because what they're competing with are agriculture and urban development. Water gets siphoned off to that. So in a normal year, about 25% of the eggs produced by these salmons hatch into baby salmons. A few years ago, in the last 2 or 3 years, only 5% of the eggs hatched because the water was unusually warm. So nearly the entire whole winter run was wiped out. And most importantly, this is what's going to blow, among the many other things that blew my mind. Look at the migration route. Just look. They're going from fresh water into salt water. They're going into ocean. Imagine swimming from one environment to the other. Their kidneys are biologically equipped to adjust to changing environments because they are breathing in oxygen. You know, the gills in the brains of the fish help convert the water to get the oxygen out of the water. And it's their bladder keeps them afloat, and the kidneys help regulate all this to make sure that there's oxygen that flows into the bloodstream because they're cold-blooded, but they also have blood that needs oxygen. So look at the flip changes that the fish has to go through to go from fresh water into ocean water. The process to getting oxygen from fresh water and what you need to get from ocean water is entirely different, but this body is equipped to do it. We're not. And Darwin called them lowly. And when you know the thousands of miles these salmons and many other fish like this travel to get back to their home or to go reproduce, and then to see them caught as bycatch, it's truly heartbreaking. I am not advocating that we all become vegetarians because fish eat fish. I just strongly feel we need to consume much more carefully and just rethink our acquisitive tendencies and to perhaps simply vote with our wallets carefully. Some of these global fish markets, they're in Tokyo is one of the best known ones. It just moved from where it was. They're the Wall Streets of the ocean. They set prices for fish. So our spending habits and our spending patterns alert producers, as does social media. So look at this. Recently, in a fish market in Kuwait, one of the vendors was sticking, how stupid was he? Fake eyes to make his fish look more fresh. And so a rival seller began marketing his own fresh fish as they put the sign up without cosmetic surgery. Can you believe that? Social media had a field day because these are all fake eyes. So the social media had a field day. Look what they started writing. Scale back a little. I loved it. Fishy tail for sure. Tons of pun. And then look at this one. They said, you know, which eye do you think you should have used depending on the fish to make it look even more attractive and appealing? But what I'm trying to convey is when the story went viral, it brought to the attention of the Ministry of Commerce and Industry in Kuwait, and they shut that shop down. And that's the power of knowledge. When you buy fish, and this is anywhere, go to seafoodwatch.org and make sure that the fish that we buy are sustainably caught. And then also, you know, recycle plastic. It's simple things like this can make a huge difference. Nature really comes back very well. She's fabulous. And it's really important that we realize we are fish biologically. All these creatures are our kin because ichthys, that is the Greek word for fish. We just had Easter, didn't we? We celebrated recently a fisherman who's known as the Good Shepherd. My head bows to all religion. And this is what ichthys stands for. And so I am Hindu. We have fish symbolisms in our religion. We have them in, obviously, gefilte fish, in Christianity, in Islam, all of this. We need to be better stewards. And as the Jewish faith says, to be our brother's keeper, to the larger kinship. Thank you for your time. I hope this presentation was meaningful, that you learned something from there that you can put to use. I wish you joy. I'm going to stop sharing now.